My name is Don Labar, and I am the Special Collections Librarian for the Alpena County, Georgia and Fletcher Public Library. Today we're going to be talking about using Alpena City Directories. Directories are kind of a multifaceted resource. And so my hope, we've changed how we've displayed our city directories online. Originally, they used to be just on our website. Now they're actually on our digital collections website that we have. They're much more user-friendly, much more research-friendly as well. I'm used to doing virtual programming, so I have to include a photo. But yep, this is me. This is our contact information if you ever need to get a hold of us at our office. If you have a research question, or maybe you want to come by and do your own research, or really not sure maybe where to get started, that's where you can kind of start with us. So my hope for today's program is to talk about what are city directories, especially in context to Alpena, how to use the new search features that we've now uploaded materials to, navigating city directories, and then also the point of this kind of programming is to give a walkthrough as well. We find a lot of times that people will come to my office, ask me a question, and I pull up resources really fast and they don't know how I do it. So this is kind of a peek behind the scenes of how, if someone came to me and asked me a question, this is just one tool set that I use to help someone understand maybe genealogical records or house histories or commercial building histories. So what is a city directory, right? There's usually several parts to a city directory. The section of most interest, of course, is the alphabetical listing of names where you might find your ancestor. So if you're looking for a relative or something like that, that's usually the main brunt of the materials that is in the city directory. But in addition to the alphabetical portion, the city directory may also contain business directories, street directories, governmental directories, a listing of town officers, schools, societies, churches, post office, and a bunch of other materials. Alpena specifically, you'll get organizations, benevolent societies, a whole gamut of materials that you can kind of glean in the community during the time that the city directory was compiled. So if your ancestor owned a business, or maybe they worked for a certain business, you'd be able to find out information based on that business in a city directory pretty easily. So when you're dealing with the city directory, for example, what I'm showing on my slide here, you get an introductory usually in the front of the book itself. And that's actually really good for most people that maybe are not from Alpena and are trying to maybe do research in Alpena or about Alpena. And the introductory portion really kind of sets the very basic generalization of Alpena and its history and its kind of breakup. So you see kind of the first part, they're talking about the 19th year of publication. They're talking about how there's 332 pages. The first 46 pages are devoted to useful miscellaneous information regarding the city and the county in general. And then it's all talking about other kind of abstract type materials that are talking about the area itself. You also see on the right of that screenshot is the general index. This is always really important to look at because this is where you can kind of get a gleaning of the different materials that are in here. So for example, we're talking about miscellaneous organizations. You could see in the third line on the right, it says bands. So actually we had a bunch of community bands. We had a Norwegian band, German band, all these types of different bands. They are listed in the city directories if they existed. So you can find out not only how many people were in them, you could also find out where they were located, their name, most likely who the officers were involved. So who was the master ceremony, who was the conductor, and all those things as well. Board of Education, Board of Equalization, Board of Health. So I like to show this and I like this program because it can be, people kind of see it as a boring city directory is just a list of names. It's much more than that. There's a lot of information that I pull. Every time I look into a city directory, I'm learning something new about this community. And this is a great place to start in understanding maybe where you need to jump. City directories do change over time. The first one for Alpena was 1883. It goes till current. So the format has changed a little bit, and I'll touch on that in just a second. So understanding city directories, I kind of went into it just a little bit in the last slide, but here's a kind of another screenshot view into what maybe the front of a directory might be. You'll find out that as you go in the alphabetical listings, when you start looking for names, you're going to start seeing different abbreviations that get involved here. And so I apologize for the cleanness of the abbreviations themselves, but you can look on our website for any of these. But basically what it is it's giving you an idea of what are these abbreviations. So ADV equals advertisement, N space E space COR is for northeast corner. So especially in these earlier city directories, you don't see as many addresses. They might go, oh, this is the second house west of Dunbar on 2nd Avenue off of the northeast corner. And so you see a lot of abbreviations that go into that. So you really want to make sure you're looking at that, or else you can get lost pretty quick. Or for example, my grandmother-in-law is in this room. So if she was listed in the city directory, she would show up as Diamond Jeannie, and then it would say something about her, the fact that she was the treasurer for the township or something like that. So it does give a designation of what they do. You might see laborer for Besser Manufacturing. You might see lumberman, mill worker, secretary, treasurer, bookkeeper. So the list kind of goes on and on about the different material that you can find out about a singular person or maybe their family as well. I showed the index in the last slide, but here's a little bit of a more, I guess, bigger view of it. Again, you can see how many different things are discussed within a city directory. So let's say someone finds out that their ancestor was in the police department. So you might be going into different city directories and looking into the police department to see who the main police officers were, the chief were, the sheriffs were, who was on the board, so who governed the police department during its time. So you can really kind of get quite detailed in the city directories, even though it's really at the core of what it is, just a list of information. So that's kind of the quick and clean. I like to do these kind of things quick and clean when it comes to this. But let me kind of give you an understanding of how a city directory might use or something. If someone came into my office and said, hey, I'm looking for information on this person, what would that look like for me and when I'm doing research? And so I'll introduce you to how we handle our city directories that are digitized now. So for example, I'm going to use a pretty easy example. So Daniel D. Hanover. Daniel D. Hanover owned the harness shop. He owned his businesses downtown all the time. The original location of the owl is actually that middle photo. And he actually ran out of the, I believe that's on the Chisholm facing side, and owl was on the second, if I'm remembering right. There's also an insurance office upstairs before it all burned down. The photo on the right is actually the Hanover block. It's now called the Center Building, right? That's where Fresh Palate is, Thunder Bay Winery, those types of businesses are there. But originally, Daniel D. Hanover built it for his own work and such. His house is actually just still standing. It's the house on the left. And how do I know that? Well, beauty is city directories. So let me exit out of this. Now I'm going to stop my screen share, and I'm going to share to a different screen here. I have a tendency to talk fast, so especially when I'm doing this. So if I'm talking way too fast, just let me know. But let's, views kind of in my way. Let's go down here. All right. So for example, let's say you want to get started on looking up a city directory and how to get there. So the first step would be, you can Google search this, you can type in a URL. If you go to Alpena County Library or just Alpena Library, you just Google search that. Oh yeah, sorry, it's blocked by a different view. So let me do that. Okay, it should go down. There we go. Okay, so this is, yeah. So like I said, you could go in the URL, which is alpenalibrary.org. This will take you right to the library's main page. This is where you find out all the different events that we're doing and all that kind of stuff. Basically, my department all lives within this one tab. So research, and there's a couple different things here that you can look at. There's two ways to get, well, that's not so much me as much as this first one is. So you can go here. You could go genealogy and local history, Great Lakes Maritime, and the one that we really want here. This will probably be going through a rebrand pretty soon. We are working on a new website, so some of this is going to look differently within the next year or two. So our Northeast Michigan Oral History and Historic Photograph Archive, think of it as just, it's our digital archive, right? So the majority of material that's on this is from our own collections. This is stuff that has been donated to us. This could be original glass plate negatives of a family collection that lived in Alpena that had the prominent history here. It could be city records that got sent to us from when they used to keep photo records of different buildings and streets. It could be primary business ledgers of lumber companies in the early 1900s. So it could really be run the gamut. Not everything in our archive makes it on the database. The idea of scanning everything and putting on that, I will be long dead before that's ever even feasible. So we try to pick what we think is going to be the most useful for a researcher and then put it on the database as a as a bit of a precursor to what we really have in person. So the hope is that people see this, it helps them in the research, and then they're contacting us so we can help them access more deeply into our archival system that we have. So this is the homepage. We call it in-house NMOA. And so there's a bunch of different materials here. There's featured collections, there's browse by, all these kind of different things that you can look at. What's news over here. So these are different items that have been added on. So if you want to go to the city directories, you're just going to go here, Alpena City Directories, RL Polk & Co. That was the company that did the city directories for us. And if you click in here, it's going to pull all the different city directories here. I need to change this, but I always like to put it oldest date first. And so you can see here, each one of these tabs, each one of these designations is a record. And within this record is the PDF that makes up the city directory, right? They're all done in black and white because there's really no need for color. But for example, just to click on this one for fun, it opens up this view. And you have basically what's known as metadata. So basically just basic information as what this is. It's a book, it's a publication. It's done by R.L. Polk & Co. as the author. It was published in Detroit, and it's around from 1883. There's several different ways that you can navigate through the city directory when you're using this resource, especially. Depending on how tech savvy you are, you can hit, I always put control click because that opens a new tab. So I just put control click, or you could click on it, I'll pull this up. And this will actually pull, my computer at office is really fast, so this might take just a second. So there's 216 pages, that's why it took so long. But basically, this is the full city directory scanned. This is all 216 pages. So you can go here, you're seeing, business advertisements. You're seeing, this is all 1883. So this is the first one. So it's very basic compared to the later ones. Indexes to advertisements. Let's say you had an ancestor that owned, or was that he was G.A. Babcock. You would be able to find their advertisement in here as well. So this is one way of navigating it. It is searchable. I will say rely on it 60% of the time. It's a good source to have in there, but to text edit one Polk directory, when we scan it, we then put what's known as OCR, so optical character resolution programs, and it tries to recognize what the word is. The systems we have are pretty good, but there are better systems out there, but we are not University of Michigan, so we have to work with what we have. And so it does a pretty good job, but I wouldn't rely on it. If you use the text search function on it and you don't find what you're looking for, still kind of hand go in there and see what you can find. So you can see all the different kind of information that's showing up here in 1883, the miscellaneous departments and such. So that's one way, just by clicking this red arrow here and then opening that. The other way is you can search directly within this resource, right? So search within this title. This is going to search that full PDF. So you could do that way, or you could always go over to the left and click pages, and that will have each page that you could click on. So if you know kind of roughly what page you need to be on, that's a good resource as well. And then you could just change this view so I don't need to see myself here. So you could just press the arrows on the right or the left to navigate page by page. You can download just the singular page. Let's say you find what you're looking for. You could download a PDF version of that, and that's just going to screen grab what you're seeing right here just as the resource. So let's show you kind of this in practice, and I can exit out of that because of that. Okay. So for example, let's say we're going back to Daniel D. Hanover. I searched in the search bar. I'll actually just show you how I did that. So I just came over here, search within this title, Hanover. And then boom, it brings me to the first result. And then it's giving me pages and parts up here. And each one of those is supposedly coming up with a result for the word that I typed in and being Hanover. Like I said, don't rely on it fully, but it is a lot better than what we used to have, because you used to have no way to search it. And so if you had no idea what you were looking for, or maybe you had an address or name, but you didn't know where, it could be quite the ordeal to find. especially when we do a lot of house histories that we do. So for example, let's say, I know the front of the city directories are all just kind of filling information, but I want to actually get to who was Daniel Hanover, right? And so I would go into here. This was one of the results, page 64. And I go in here and I look for Hanover. So Hanover. So it's the first result towards the top here. He's highlighted bigger. City directories had a tendency to highlight names bigger. I don't know what the criteria was for it, but typically it seems to hover around men, especially, and especially like large business owners. So if they own kind of a small company, maybe not. But Hanover was a fairly prominent business person in his time. So I'm assuming that's what qualified the larger highlight. I don't know if they paid extra for it or how that worked, but that seems to be useful. Yeah, there is. So there's advertising towards the front, and then there's advertising on most pages. So you can actually see advertisements back down here. So the Chicago and Grand Trunk Railroad, W.E. Rogers. So you see it's laid all throughout it. Each city directory at the beginning will have an index to all advertisements through the book. So if you're looking, yeah, and you could definitely look into that. And I think in this one, he might have one. So it would show what he is. So Daniel D. Hanover shows up here. In parentheses, has the name of his company, Hanover and Parrish, and then what he was. So he was a harness manufacturer. That's what MNFR is. It's saying that his business was at 101 South 2nd and his residence was at 212 South 3rd. So that those three images I showed you before, the building that was in the middle, the white building, that was the 101 South 2nd. And then the house that I showed you was that 3rd Avenue home. And so that's just kind of one example of what could show up when you're looking for Hanover. Another good one, I want to do Parrish. I think I can do this. So Parrish, so it came over Hanover and Parrish was the company. I want to know who Parrish was. So again, I searched, Parrish is showing up underneath Hanover's name because he was a business partner. Let's see if this, so like I said, it's not always perfect, that text searchability to it. It's something that as we grow, we'll refine and change over. But it did find the other Parrish. So it didn't find his alphabetical name listing, but it did find his business name. You see on the far right up here, Carriage and Wagon Dealers, Hanover and Parrish. And so this is a good example of they don't name the address of the business at this level, right? So you have Carriage and Wagon Dealers, Hanover and Parrish, 3rd between River and Chisholm. And so that doesn't show up unless you actually look underneath the people's names, and then you'll see a more robust listing for that. So let's actually go in here. So we're on page 120. So I know that's most of the time, not always, the business listings and directories are at the end, unless it was otherwise noted. So let me go, I'm going to arbitrarily go in here. So Parrish. So you can go page by page, you can skip around. Okay, and there's Parrish, right? So Parrish is at the bottom right here. You can zoom in on these books to a degree, as I say it. So Parrish is down here. Charles W. Parrish, Hanover and Parrish. He was the carriage painter and trimmer. So the two of them worked together doing different things. And then he resided at 156 West Washington Avenue. He was doing all the trim work on the carriages. So all the woodworking on it and the finessing to it as well. So you can kind of get an idea. So let's say you had your relative was the Hanover gentleman. You're starting to understand more about the business, whose business partners were, where the business was located, where he lived, where they lived. You start to get a much better understanding of maybe the community that he was involved in by doing that. Another example, I'm going to jump here. I'm going to jump to 1905, right? So about 10 years or so later, I've done a Hanover search again, and I've gone in here and I have a couple of results, right? And so 1905, I have on page, what do I want to show? I want to show 59. So I'm on 59. I wish our system let it. So sometimes when you do text search, it'll highlight the result. Unfortunately, this one does not. I would love to change that, but it's just the kind of the trickiness of our database. And I want that view to go away because I don't really need that. Oh, well. So again, Hanover showing up again, carriages, harnesses, goods, and agricultural business. The biggest difference is he no longer has parish involved. So his business has evolved. It's grown or not grown, depending on how you look on it. And parish is no longer part of the picture and part of the business. So either parish has moved away, parish has gone off to do something else, but also Hanover has started to diversify his businesses. He's doing carriages, he's doing harnesses, he's doing sporting goods. I'm assuming it's some form of equipment-based sales and also agricultural implements. So he's working with the farmers in the community and such. And so his address has changed. He's at 119 South 2nd Avenue, and he's at 211 South 3rd Avenue, or he's at the same home, different business address. And then you could see, by this time I showed you that one photo of the Hanover block that he built or he had built. And so he moved in there. Let's see, I want to show one, where are we on? 126 collections. So you could see, so if you look up Hanover, right, you're going to start seeing a bunch of things because now Hanover owns a building that's named after him. So all of a sudden you start, when you do that search function, you're going to find things like, so we're now in a business directory section of it. And then you see collection agents, Cobb and Covey, and they're in the Hanover block. So you're starting to learn more about the impact this person might have had. They had a business, they rented out their space, and they had different businesses renting from them. Let's see, I think this just shows the same. Well, this is Hanover's, this is going to be Hanover's business listing independently. So let's see, harness makers. So again, harness makers, Daniel D. Hanover's over here on the top right. They shows a home address and such. That will change. You sometimes will see the same business listed multiple times in a business directory, depending on the diversity of what they provided. So if they provided both farming equipment and I don't know, car wheels or something like that, you might see them in automobiles and you might see them in tractor supplies or something like that. So you might see them listed multiple times. And then let's jump again about 11 more years from now. Then we're on page 73. I've done the Hanover search again. And one more time, we've come in and we've looked for Hanover and we're trying to find out where did he go, what's going on. His name now no longer shows up as brightly as it did in the past. We've jumped about 10, 11 years, and all of a sudden he's had a very, very significant business change. He's now the president of the Alpena Woolen Company. He's making wool products, probably for fabrics, tents, blankets, things like that. And one of the biggest things you could say there is between 1905 and 1916, what started to become mass produced. Has 4 wheels, cars. So Cars Model A comes out, or is it Model T? Comes out in 1908. And so that dramatically destroyed the carriage industry all across the United States. So Daniel D. Hanover had enough intellect to himself to realize that he was in a dying business, and he completely switched careers and what he was doing, probably using his connections from the agricultural side of his business to go into this new business for him. So that's just kind of like a basic understanding of how city directories can be used. And how they can be, it's much more than just a name. You can find where they're living, the businesses that they're involved in. And so you can really kind of get a richer understanding. And what the beauty of this is too, is that this gives you a lot of information very quickly that you could then take on to a bunch of different practical uses. So you could take the information that we just learned from the city directory, you could take that to a Sanborn map. Sanborn maps were insurance records for homes, they were insurance records for commercial corridors, right? And so insurance agents will use this and go, okay, well, this is a high risk area. Your house or your business is near that. So your insurance is going to reflect that, right? If it had a high fire damage. So a lot of information goes in the Sanborn maps, especially with build type. So if it's brick, it was balloon framed. Was it wood? Was it stone? How many stoves did it have? How many windows did it have? How many stories did it have? So you get a bird's eye view in your community. And so a city directory is really important because, for example, let's say you're looking up an ancestor, they lived in a home, addresses change over time. So you might think that your ancestor lives in 417 South 2nd Avenue because for the last 50 years of your life, it's always been that address. Well, 60 years ago, it was a completely different address because a house wasn't built next to it. And then a house was built next to it and they changed the address. So you want to know that, because then when you go into Sanborn maps or things like that, you want to make sure you're looking at the right home, because if you're looking at a lot of things bird's eye view, especially in the less affluent parts of the community, homes can start to look really, really similar. Or you might go, oh, well, there's a home here, and realize it's not the same house if you look at it again. So city directories can really be used to kind of aid in that kind of in-depth research if you want to go down that line. If not, then you always call me and I go down that line. For example, too, just kind of wrap up here a little bit. I always like to keep these ones fast because they're not as exciting as like a history one. So people tend to fall asleep if I go over 30 minutes. So for example, with city directories, in the early years from like 1883 to 1910, all the city directories didn't use a street directory, right? It was purely just last name. So if you didn't know, if you went, I just moved into a historic home, I want to know more history about it, it gets really tricky older than 1910 for me, because I don't know, I can't just look it up by address very easily. Yes, I could use the text search function within this, but like I said, take that with about 60% accuracy. So the beauty is, so in 1910, Alpena becomes big enough that they start putting a street directory into it. And I could show you what that looks like. I believe it was 1910. Otherwise, it was 1916. And so with city directories, while I'm waiting for this load, city directories are things that we have them all the way up to like 2020. So let's say you're doing, like my house was a post-World War GI house, ranch home, super simple, 3-bedroom, 1-bath, over by Ella White, really common, right after World War II. And so my house is not built long ago, but I still want to know the history. And I use city directories to track who owned the home. And prior to my wife owning it, there's only been 2 other owners, which has been great because this makes it really easy for me to research. And then I can find obituaries for people because I know their names. I then find out what churches they went to, what organizations they were involved in, what business they were in, how many kids they had, how many kids they had in that very small house, you know, kind of thing like that. And so you start to get a much more robust understanding of a home, of a family by starting with the city directories. So they do index the streets, but that's not what I'm looking for. I am looking for the index, because that would really be helpful. Okay, here we are. So this is what I was meaning by a street directory. So rather than having it be organized by a last name from A to Z, you will have both starting in 1910. So you go to actual addresses here. So let's say I don't know who lived in the home, but I know what the address was. I looked in the Sanborn maps. I know this house is 220 on Adams Street from Long Lake Avenue and to East Huron. And so I know it's 220. I didn't know who the name was. So all of a sudden now I know who the name was. So it might be John Seaman, right? And so now I know who this is during this time period. And if I have the time, what I would then do is I would start going back and forth. So depending on what kind of history I'm trying to find, I would go back a couple of years to try to see if I can track homes from there. So that's something actually that we were doing this morning. Like we're going to be doing a house history tour, an external house history architecture tour all around Dunbar, White, Second and First, and that's through ACC's continued education program, I think, with Lisa Blumenthal. And so that's the very first step that I do is I go into city directories and I spend a fair amount of time in these trying to figure out who lived in these homes around the time that roughly they were built. Because usually you might go, wow, what a beautiful home. I wonder who built it. By the time you find out who built it, it makes pretty much a lot of sense who built and why. A lot of it has to do with their social standing, who they worked for, and at what level did they work for that organization. So a bookkeeper's home is going to look significantly different than, say, a laborer. And so you'll see those communities and you'll be able to pull that history, most of that history from city directories, or complement other resources using city directories to it as well. So that's my quick and clean of city directories. I will stop this share. And I'm open to any questions about these resources or maybe any other ones that I might have mentioned. Happy to discuss more. Yep.
What's the latest directory they have?
Yeah, so the latest directory that we're legally able to have online is 1920 right now. We can add, technically the safe rule with copyright right now is 1923. So we just haven't scanned the there isn't a 1923. There's a It alternates years. So we have a 1922 one.
How did the company get the information?
Yeah, so the company got its information through a series of, they would work with the city, they'd work with the county and here township as well. They'd pull basic governmental records. They'd also have surveyors would come up and look at these things themselves. And they're also pulling from like state censuses and things like that as well. And so they kept their records, and it's weird looking at myself from three different ways here. So, you know, they would pull from that information mainly too. It's the same thing as like a Sanborn map. Sanborn maps were published every couple of years. But a lot of times you'd get what's called like a base map. And so in 1924, you'd have a base map, and then you have a surveyor would come up and they'd amend the map. And like a subscription, you go, okay, I subscribe to Sanborn maps. And the person would go, okay, well, this has changed, this has changed, this has changed. And they'd send all the material to you, and then you would literally glue it to the page and amend that original base map. So it's kind of the same thing with city directories to some degree. Places like Alpena are not as priority as say Detroit. So Detroit's going to have Sanborn maps, city directories all the time. Probably a lot more detail and a lot more complexity than Alpena, but that's also kind of a blessing in its own sense. So if you're researching Alpena, it's going to be maybe not as easy as like Onaway, but it's going to be still pretty standard for this level. So
Is that kind of stuff compiled now electronically?
Like in terms of the city directories being compiled, yeah, I don't know. I mean, the company that bought Polk Directories is a very strong digital database system. They work with statistics, is the parent company. They still publish a city directory, and we still buy it. So they still produce a physical one, but I think certain companies, like if you're a city municipality or something like that, you're probably subscribing to the database system too, depending on what you are, and you'll be accessing those resources electronically rather than physically, so you have a quicker search to it. So, yeah. Any other questions? Cool. Easy peasy. Thank you very much.
Thank you.